Good evening. Welcome to the final hour of the Full View this Monday. Let's start with your headlines and some of the international ones. President Cyril Ramaphosa among world leaders participating in the United Nations 75th anniversary celebrations. The ANC in Gauteng extends Health MEC Badile Masuku's leave of absence because of inadequacies in the Provincial Integrity Commission report. The leadership of Health Workers Union Nahau to meet with President Cyril Ramaphosa this week to discuss salary and other demands. Senior United Nations officials and world leaders have called for an inclusive multilateralism drawing on all sectors of society as the world body marked its 75th anniversary during a hybrid commemorative event at UN headquarters in New York. A high-level segment of the 75th session of the General Assembly is underway under the theme, "The Future We Want, the United Nations We Need," reaffirming our collective commitment to multilateralism. Member states also adopted a political declaration vowing to strengthen international cooperation and leave no one behind.
Multilateralism is not an option, but a necessity as we build back better and greener for a more equal, more resilient, and more sustainable world. The United Nations must be at the center of our efforts. Since the UN was established, the world has changed in unimaginable ways. An upgraded UN must respond to these challenges and changes to stay relevant and effective.
25 years since the Beijing Platform for Action, gender inequality remains the greatest single challenge to human rights around the world. Climate calamity looms. Biodiversity is collapsing. Poverty is again rising. Hatred is spreading. Geopolitical tensions are escalating, and nuclear weapons remain on hair-trigger alert. Transformative technologies have opened up new opportunities, but also exposed new threats. And the COVID-19 pandemic has laid bare the world's fragilities. We can only address them together. Today we have a surplus of multilateral challenges and a deficit of multilateral solutions. I welcome the General Assembly's 75th anniversary declaration and commitment to reinvigorate multilateralism.
突如其来的新冠肺炎疫情
The sudden attack of COVID-19 is a grave test for the entire world. In the face of new realities and challenges, we must do some serious thinking. What kind of UN is needed for the world? How should the organization play its role in the post-COVID era? The UN must stand firm for justice. Mutual respect and equality among all countries, big or small, represents the progress of our times. And it is the foremost principle of the UN Charter. All need to follow the approach of extensive consultation, joint contribution, and share benefits. All need to come together to uphold universal security, share the fruits of development, and jointly decide on the future of the world.
Let's catch up now with our New York correspondent, SABC's Sherwin Bryce-Pease. Sherwin, let's first start with the President of South African AU Chair Cyril Ramaphosa's address earlier on. Just a quick recap of that.
Yeah, really short statements here to commemorate the 75th anniversary. It's a piece of a hybrid commemoration. A lot of these videos are pre-recorded, including the AU chairs and South Africa's president. He talked about the task before UN member states to chart a course for a transformative and inclusive future in the aftermath of this pandemic. He reiterated South Africa's steadfast belief in the United Nations as the central organization in terms of multilateral cooperation. The UN system, he said, is the best means by which we can address and overcome global challenges. And it is only through multilateralism that we can forge strategies for the benefit of all. to realize a just and humane world, the UN must be fit for purpose. And you will hear this reiterated by a number of heads of state speaking today. He called for adequate funding and representation in its decision-making structures. And I think what the president there referring to in the main is the reform of various organs of this United Nations, in particular the UN Security Council, in which South Africa currently serves in a non-permanent capacity. Of course, you heard earlier, late last week, from Naledi Pandor, South Africa's International Relations and Cooperation Minister, and she talked about how important it was to place multilateralism at the center of the global system. But she also talked about the need for the renewal of the Esselwini Consensus, this document that African heads of state and government adopted 15 years ago, in which it seeks at least two permanent seats for African countries that include the veto. Naledi Pandor telling me that it was time to reinvigorate that document as the urgency grows in this world that has changed in the 75 years since the UN Charter was adopted in San Francisco in 1994. The need for a more representative United Nations that really reflects the changes we have seen in the world in the last 75 years. We do no longer live in a unipolar world, but a multipolar world. You have China rising, you have Africa rising, and so the UN really in need of being more reflective of those power dynamics and certainly the shifts we've seen in the last 7 decades.
And precisely, I suppose, why multilateralism isn't trouble showing. Let's talk about another document, a political declaration adopted through consensus. What exactly does this document tell us about the future that member states have agreed to?
I have the document in front of me. It's a 4-page document. As you can see, each page filled up with all sorts of permutations and things that the United Nations member states agree to. They have voted on this through a consensus motion in the General Assembly. And it talks about things like this. We want to leave no one behind. We will protect our planet. We will promote peace and prevent conflicts. We will abide by international law and ensure justice. We will place women and girls at the center. We will build trust. We will improve digital cooperation. But of course, what you say in a political declaration and what happens in reality are often two different things. One, just to look at the 2015 adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals or the Paris Climate Change Accord, and what we hear in terms of implementation in that the world is lagging in terms of all the 170 plus targets that inform those SDGs. And I think, here you have another utopian kind of document in terms of how member states are going to work together. The big concern here is that countries tend to focus on their national interests. They tend to take unilateral decisions that go against the collective. We see that often in the 15-member Security Council. So while you have this aspirational document about how the United Nations is going to work as a collective for the common good of humanity, it's always very difficult in practice because the UN Charter also affirms the sovereignty of states as a central theme of the UN Charter. And there, I think, lies the complication when one looks at this in reality. But let's listen to what Chinese President Xi Jinping had to say on this.
中国将始终做多边主义的践行者。
China will continue to be a true follower of multilateralism. It will stay actively engaged in reforming and developing the global governance system. It will firmly uphold the UN-centered international system, firmly uphold the international order underpinned by international law, and firmly defend the United Nations' central role in international affairs.
And while the 75-year commemoration of the UN was being commemorated and celebrated here in New York, you had the United States in Washington try to reimpose sanctions on Iran, basically going against every other member of the UN Security Council in terms of reimposing sanctions in terms of the Iran nuclear deal. The United Nations, and I think with the support of the Dominican Republic, standing alone. And I think that is an example of this battle between unilateral action and the multilateralism that so many countries are seeking as a central role here for the UN, Tsepiso.
Very briefly, if you can talk about this, a high-level week of a hybrid model that's been adopted due to COVID-19 as the pandemic becomes a big talking point at this year's UN General Assembly. So how have some of the other leaders who've spoken addressed this global concern?
Yeah, one of those leaders, one of the earlier speakers was Nigeria's president who addressed this in the main. And I will say the political declaration, Tshepiso, also talks about we will be prepared. It says the COVID-19 pandemic caught us off guard. It has served as a wake-up call for improving our preparedness for not only health-related crises, but also other challenges and crises. We need to strengthen international cooperation, coordination and solidarity. This is what Muhammadu Buhari had to say.
The inward-looking tendencies exhibited by member states in the wake of the pandemic have particularly revealed an urgent need for us to strengthen international cooperation, unity and solidarity to address all negative developments, including climate change, violent extremism, natural disasters, and cyber security. However, as we continue to battle the pandemic and search for possible solutions, including an effective vaccine, we implore nations to adopt a global approach in addressing the global health emergency in a bid to build the future we want.
So the people's vaccine, a big conversation point, but unfortunately, as you mentioned, Tshepiso, it's a hybrid model. You have delegations represented by permanent representatives here in New York, but a lot of the speeches are being done virtually. They've been pre-recorded. But imagine a consensus, I think, in terms of the majority of leaders that will speak here, in terms of the need for greater cooperation, in terms of how this vaccine is created, and of course the distribution thereof in terms of an equitable distribution around the world.
All right, thanks a lot for that update, Sherwin. And of course, we'll continue talking to you about this. Sherwin Bryce-Pease, my colleague in New York.